The stars had never blinked before. They just shimmered, steady, silent guardians of the night. But that night, above the forests of northern Alaska, they flickered in a strange rhythm. At first, no one noticed. Then came the hum, deep and bone-shaking, like the earth itself had drawn breath and was holding it. Sergeant Elias Roan didn't believe in omens, but even he felt something primal shift. He stood still among the pines, camouflage netting blending him into the forest like a phantom. Beside him, Private Marla exhaled sharply, her breath curling in the cold. Neither spoke. The stars shifted again, and then they arrived. Like shards of living obsidian, the alien ships cut through the clouds without a sound. No thunder, no smoke, just sleek, blade-shaped vessels descending into Earth's atmosphere as though they owned it. The sky is filled with them. From Mumbai to Montreal, Rome to Rio, the invasion unfolded in a synchronized ballet of silent terror. No broadcasts, no demands. Just presence. Elias had served 15 years in shadow ops. He'd seen dictators fall, insurgencies rise, and more death than he cared to catalog, but this was different. He couldn't explain how, but the air itself felt thinner now. Electric, predatory. They attacked within hours. The aliens didn't look like the stories. No green men, no saucer-eyed beings. They were tall, insectoid, armor glistening with iridescent ridges like beetle shells. Blue light pulsed where eyes should be. Weapons fused their arms like extensions of thought. And they didn't shoot to warn. They vaporized. Cities folded under them. Bombs, bullets, missiles. Nothing pierced their tech. One by one, command centers went dark. Satellites lost signal. Communication collapsed. Earth became a patchwork of isolated cries for help. At Fort Kalin, deep in the Alaskan wilderness, the remnants of Bravo Company held their breath and waited. Elias had always hated the word last. It made everything feel doomed. But now, as one of the last operational units with full force training, they were exactly that, last. Not best, just still breathing. He looked at Marla. Her eyes were hard, but her lip trembled faintly. "We stay quiet," he whispered. "We stay unseen. We learn." "Sir," she said, tightening her grip on the rifle. "Do they even breathe?" He didn't answer. Days blurred. The aliens set up forward outposts, cold structures that sprouted overnight like metal tumors. They scanned, marched, hunted, and they struggled, not with resistance. They had crushed that quickly, but with visibility. Something about Earth's deep wildernesses seemed to vex them. Trees scrambled their sensors. Mountains shielded heat signatures. Animals created noise that mimicked human movement. Their precision faltered. That was when Elias began to understand. They expected humans to fight like they did. Straight lines, open battles, overwhelming force. They hadn't planned for absence, for stillness, for silence. One night, while observing an alien patrol from a moss-covered outcrop, Elias noticed something odd. The creature's head swiveled left and right, pausing as though confused. It stepped forward, tripped a branch snare, and was dragged violently into a concealed ravine. No gunfire, no explosion, just the quiet crunch of survival. Below, in the underbrush, a small group of survivors melted back into the shadows. Camouflaged to the point of invisibility, faces streaked with ash and leaves. They were ghosts. Rebels. Hunters. Human. Elias smiled. He called it mirror warfare. If the aliens brought machines, humans would become Earth. If they watched from above, humans would sink beneath. And if they hunted, humans would vanish entirely. In the beginning, it wasn't strategy, it was instinct. Now it was doctrine. Bravo Company stopped trying to strike back in force. They listened, watched, learned. Marla became adept at identifying alien movement patterns. She could hear the difference between a drone and a scout just by the shift in wind. Private Kenta, once a demolitions expert, retooled his skills into crafting silent traps using vines, ice, and sharpened bone. The forest became a library of weapons, none digital, all deadly. They moved in silence, speaking only with hand signals or glances. They lived underground or high in the canopies. Their bodies blended into surroundings, wrapped in moss-stitched fabrics and mud, heat signatures masked with cold sap and wet stone. Elias called them shadows with teeth. One by one, alien scouts disappeared. Drones stopped returning. Their patrols grew smaller, more hesitant. Something was wrong. The invincible force had found a battlefield it didn't understand. But understanding came too late. Elias and his unit intercepted a transmission between two alien commanders, using a cracked signal relay the rebels had built from salvage tech. The alien language was guttural, sharp, layered like broken glass. But one phrase translated clearly. Earth's life forms camouflage like prey, but they strike like predators. They were afraid. That night, the unit voted, not on whether to fight. They were already fighting, but on whether to expand, to become more than just survivors, to become the spark. They said yes. Word traveled like whispers in wind. Camouflage messengers crossed mountains. Forest enclaves responded with coded light signals. The resistance wasn't dead. It had evolved. Hidden not because it was weak, but because it had learned disappearance was power. The aliens began deploying more aggressive measures. Flame drones, terrain disruptors, sonic pulses. But it only made the Earth angrier. Wildfires drove out the invaders, then died under rains no machine had predicted. Mudslides crushed scout vehicles. Frost turned their tech brittle. Still, Bravo Company pressed forward. Elias never sought fame. He knew most would never know the battles waged in the woods. The city dwellers called it superstition, myth, green ghosts, forest spirits. But those who lived it knew the truth. They weren't spirits. They were human, stripped of civilization, maybe, but not of will. Never that. And as Elias crouched in the underbrush that last night of the first phase, watching an alien war machine scan an empty field, unaware of the dozen human eyes just feet away, he felt no fear, only patience. It would turn. It always did. And when it did, the Earth would take it. Quietly. Entirely. By dawn, the machine was gone, and the forest was quiet again. For now, the first kill was an accident. Private Kenna hadn't meant for the vine-sprung spike trap to do more than frighten the drone. He hadn't even known the creature would follow them that far into the marsh. But when the shriek came, metal shearing, insectoid limbs flailing in the mud, blue ichor spraying like mist, he understood. The war had changed. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were winning. Elias didn't celebrate. The rest of Bravo Company cheered in whispers, fists clenched in quiet triumph. But the sergeant simply studied the body. The alien's exos cracked at the seams, its internal circuits exposed like raw nerves. Beneath the armor, the creature's skin shimmered, translucent and pale, like it hadn't known sunlight in years. "They don't adapt well," he murmured. Marla knelt beside him, blade drawn, her face streaked in ash and algae. "They expect straight lines. We give them chaos." The forest had become more than shelter. It was weapon, sanctuary, and disguise. Over weeks of raids and close calls, Bravo Company had blended into the wilderness, so completely they no longer remembered what clean felt like. Mud caked their suits. Leaves clung to their helmets. Vines were stitched into their clothes. They smelled like the earth, moved with the trees, and slept beneath roots and rock. Ken had gone further than most. He'd begun experimenting, twisting moss into thermal insulating fabrics, weaving algae through netting to scatter infrared scans. His crowning achievement was what he called swamp skin, a suit lined with liquid cooling channels fed by river water. Elias had watched in action. A drone had passed within 10 feet of Kenta, hovering, scanning, and found nothing. It was as if the man had dissolved into mist. The aliens responded with fury. Their patrols doubled. They deployed heat hunters, quadrupedal machines that sniff for trace body temperatures. They tried fire, burning stretches of forest where human movement had been detected, but the resistance adapted faster. Marla began carving walkable paths through canopy, suspended walkways of braided vine and bone. They moved like shadows, never on the ground for long. Elias authorized the use of decoy signals, heat bladders wrapped in deer hide, rigged to body temperature traps that lured scouts into deadfalls. They stopped fighting fair. Fair had never been part of the deal. The legend of the Green Ghost spread quickly. Alien comms buzzed with reports of soldiers vanishing mid-sentence, of entire squads lost to silence. No gunfire, no explosions, just empty static where voices should have been. Some believed it was Earth itself retaliating. Others suspected advanced human tech. The truth was more unnerving. It was camouflage. The aliens, for all their superior sensors and logic, could not comprehend invisibility born from instinct. They mimicked nothing. They adapted slowly. Their systems were rigid, unaccustomed to chaos of a planet teeming with life that did not behave according to protocol. Bravo Company taught them fear. Elias rarely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of Lieutenant Ferris, whose last scream had echoed to the forest 3 weeks earlier, cut short by plasma fire. His charred helmet still hung from a tree branch, a silent warning to anyone who ventured too close. But Elias wasn't haunted by Ferris's death. He was haunted by the rage that followed. That night, his team had painted themselves with mud, crawled beneath the fog like ghosts, and dismantled an alien comms tower by hand, pulling it down with vine ropes and gravity. Not a single shot fired, not a single word spoken. And when the flames finally lit the sky, Elias had watched the horizon glow and thought, they underestimated the forest. Humans were not soldiers anymore. They were predators. Each step silent, each breath measured. They had redefined warfare, not in tech, but in temperament. The war wasn't about winning ground. It was about erasing certainty. The aliens no longer knew where Earth ended and where the humans began. Resistance cells began mimicking Bravo Company's methods. Disparate survivor groups across the globe communicated using coded leaf patterns, bird call mimicry, and moss-carved glyphs. Slowly, the ghosts multiplied. Swamps, tundras, deserts, no longer battlegrounds, but theaters of camouflage. It wasn't perfect. There were losses. Kenta's brother died in a cave collapse while laying thermal mines. Marla lost a finger during a misjudged ambush. Elias had to personally silence a traitor who'd broken radio silence and led a scout patrol straight to an encampment. 43 gone in minutes. Still, they pushed forward. Then came Black Hollow. The ravine was a natural choke point, shadowed by towering cliffs and thick with fog. The aliens had funneled through it dozens of times without incident. Bravo Company had waited for days. No fire, no movement, just breath and patience. When the column passed through, 30 soldiers, 2 drones, a mobile command unit, they triggered everything. The canopy above collapsed in nets of bramble and vine. The ground split, revealing spike pits lined with scavenged alien blades. Noise bombs detonated, mimicking a full-scale assault. Confused and blinded, the aliens fired wildly into trees that weren't there. By the time it ended, only the fog remained. Elias stood in the mist, his chest heaving. The team emerged from nowhere, blood-streaked and silent. No cheers, no celebration, just nods. They melted back into the trees without a word. The message had been sent. Hours later, an intercepted alien broadcast, heavily distorted, uttered the phrase, "Terminate sectors with natural camouflage concentration. Engage with extreme prejudice." Elias listened to the static between the words and realized something vital. They still didn't get it. They thought camouflage was a place, a thing, a tactic. They didn't understand it was a mindset. That night, Elias sat by a quiet stream, sharpening his blade. Marla approached, holding a carved chunk of bark etched with lines and swirls, a message from another cell in the Rockies. The ghosts were multiplying. "They're calling it a doctrine now," she said. "Ghost warfare. Whole squads ditching gear for bark and bone." He nodded. "They'll learn, or they won't." She sat beside him, eyes on the water. "What if they torch the whole world trying to find us?" Elias didn't answer at first. He watched the moon ripple on the surface of the stream, then spoke softly. "Then they'll realize we're the world." Marla didn't smile, but she didn't argue. The night passed in stillness, the kind only found in places untouched by fire or noise. The forest pulsed with life, owls whispering, insects singing, wind rustling through ancient leaves. And somewhere far beyond, machines churned and alien voices plotted. But in the shadows, beneath bark and beneath stone, the ghosts listened, and they waited. Rain fell in sheets, drumming against the broad leaves above with a rhythm that echoed the pulse in Elias's ears. The air was thick with petrichor and tension, the kind that made the forest feel alive in a way that made even the veterans uneasy. It had been 3 days since Black Hollow, 3 days since the aliens pulled back without explanation, 3 days without contact, without surveillance drones, without any trace of their presence. That silence was more unnerving than a firefight. Elias crouched beside a fallen log, eyes scanning the clearing ahead. The trees had grown unusually sparse here, their trunks blackened at the base, bark scarred as if by flame. It wasn't the work of his people. The burn patterns were too deliberate, circular, clean, not a scorched earth attack, but something calculated. "They're sweeping the ground," Marla whispered beside him, crouched low with her rifle resting lightly against her knee. "Not just searching, sterilizing." Elias nodded grimly. "They're afraid of what we've become." Kenta's voice crackled in softly through the moss-insulated earpiece. "I've picked up a pattern. Grid sweeps, rotating electromagnetic bursts, every 7 minutes. But they're not targeting movement." "Then what?" Elias asked. "Pattern irregularities. Anything that doesn't match the terrain database." Elias exhaled through his teeth. "They're mapping the planet, replacing instinct with statistics. We need to stay unpredictable." Marla glanced at him. Unpredictable's our default. But something felt different now. The aliens weren't just reacting. They were planning, learning. Their silence had not been retreat. It had been preparation. The first real sign came at dusk. It started with a faint hum, like bees in a jar. Then came the glow. Pinpoints of blue scattered through the trees, hovering like ghostly fireflies. But they weren't drones. Not this time. They didn't move, didn't scan. They pulsed. Beacons. Kenna's voice came through again, urgent this time. They're marking zones, tagging areas with psychic dampeners. Marla stiffened. Psychic. They pulse in frequencies that scramble instinct, disrupt orientation. I nearly walked straight into a branch I've been staring at for 5 minutes. They're trying to short-circuit our spatial memory. Elias swore under his breath. The aliens had stopped trying to see them. Now they were trying to make them not see themselves. He issued the retreat signal. 2 quick pulses through the comm band, followed by a long hold. One by one, his squad disengaged and melted back into the underbrush. They moved deeper into the forest, where the moss grew thicker and the trees formed a natural dome overhead. But the humming followed. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat cross-legged in the hollow of a gnarled tree, eyes half closed, listening. His mind reeled with possibilities. The beacons weren't a full assault, but they were the beginning of one. The aliens were engineering disorientation. Not destruction, but confusion. And that was worse. They were turning the forest against its guardians. Come morning, the animals were gone. No birdsong, no rustling, no insect drone, just silence. Marla crouched beside a dry creek bed, her face pale. "I haven't seen a squirrel in 2 miles. "Me neither," Elias said. "Something's pushed them out." The team reconvened at Ridgepoint, a jagged outcrop overlooking a ravine. From there, they could see the valley below. And that's when they saw it. A machine. Unlike the agile scout drones or the brutish quadrupeds they'd faced before, this one was enormous. Stationary. Almost elegant in its construction. Half buried in the ground, its limbs spread like a spider's, each one trailing into the earth. It pulsed with light at regular intervals, and wherever it shone, the ground changed. Grass wilted, moss blackened, trees bent, curling toward the light, like they were being pulled apart from within. It was terraforming, but not for colonization, for perception. "They're warping the forest's identity," Kenna whispered, "changing its pattern. So it no longer fits what we've memorized." Marla clenched her fists. "They're making camouflage impossible." "No," Elias murmured. "They're making the forest forget us." It wasn't a war of weapons anymore. It was a war of memory, of identity. Elias knew they couldn't attack the machine head-on. It would be protected, possibly self-defended. So instead, they followed its roots, those massive limb-like extensions digging into the forest floor. Each one pulsed with energy, feeding the transformation outward. They traced one route for miles, through gulches and over cliffs, until they found its anchor point, a small relay node disguised as a stone outcrop, blinking faintly beneath a cover of foliage. It was guarded by 2 sentries, alien soldiers with glowing visors and stiff, insectoid posture. They weren't patrolling. They were meditating. Or sinking. Elias didn't know which, but he didn't like it. "We disable this," he whispered. "We slow the spread." Marla smiled. "Sounds like a plan." The strike was surgical. Elias and Marla flanked from the left. Kenna from above, dangling from a vine net he'd woven days earlier. Timing was everything. Marla moved first, tossing a silence pod, an improvised EMP made from alien scrap and turtle shells. It detonated with a burst of static that fried comms but left the air eerily quiet. Kenta dropped next, blade out, severing the first sentry's neck before it could twitch. Elias lunged from a brush, driving his knife into the second's torso. It let out a single gasp, like wind in a hollow reed, then fell limp. The relay node was exposed. Kenta slid beside it, pulling tools from his pouch. "This won't be permanent," he warned, "but I can loop the signal. Make it think the distortion's working." "Do it," Elias said. "Then we move." As Kenna worked, Elias stared back the way they came. The machine's glow had dimmed slightly, its pulses less rhythmic. It was working, but not fast enough. They needed a new strategy. A noise caught his ear, soft, rhythmic clicking. Not alien tech. Not a predator. Footsteps. Human. A figure emerged from the trees. Thin, wiry, clad in bark-colored cloth. Their face was obscured by a mask of lichen and bone. When they spoke, their voice was barely more than wind. "You're Elias." He didn't reply. His hand hovered near his knife. "We've heard of you," the figure continued. "Ghost Commander. Ridgeborn. Builder of the hollow trap." Marla stepped forward. "You're one of the northern cells." The figure nodded. "We've been watching. Your methods inspired us. But the ghosts need to evolve." Elias narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" The figure knelt and traced something in the dirt. A pattern. Lines and spirals. Glyphs not unlike the ones Marla had shown him before. But these were more complex. They pulsed with symbolic weight, like language and map combined. "Camouflage is no longer hiding," the figure said. "It is rewriting. We do not vanish, we become. The forest isn't our shield. It's our identity." Elias stared at the glyphs. It clicked. The aliens could track patterns. Data. Movement. But they couldn't comprehend, meaning born a myth of instinct of story. The resistance didn't need to disappear. They needed to become unreadable, to evolve their camouflage into something that transcended sight and sound. They needed to become legends. Kenta finished looping the signal. The relay pulsed, then went dormant. Marla looked at Elias. "Next move?" He rose slowly, the rain returning as a soft. The mountain wind howled across the ridge like a wounded animal, pulling clouds down over the peaks and smothering the world in pale mist. Elias stood at the edge of a shattered overlook, staring down into the valley that had once been a thriving stretch of forest. Now it was a scar. The trees were gone, reduced to blackened stumps and ash veins. The air shimmered with residual heat. Even the birds refused to return. Behind him, the resistance gathered. No longer a single squad, but an assembly. Ghost cells from the north, east, and beyond had arrived silently over the past days, moving through the mountains with footsteps no sensor could trace. Each wore a different kind of camouflage: birch skin cloaks, snow-dusted antler helms, soot-darkened moss robes. There were no ranks here, only survivors who had become something more. Kenneth stepped up beside Elias, his swampskin suit patched with strips of white bark and faded sigils. His face, once boyish, now held the hard lines of a man who had watched the world die and refused to go with it. "They've built something," he said, nodding toward the valley. "Bigger than before. It's not just terraforming. It's a hub. Command relay. Everything else connects here. Elias didn't answer immediately. He watched the structure, a monolith of obsidian alloy and alien light, pulsing steady rhythm. Every second, a signal went out. He could feel it in his bones, like the forest's heartbeat had been replaced with machinery. Marla approached from the treeline. She wore a new piece of armor, scraps of alien plating melted into a curved shoulder guard, a trophy from their last ambush. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon. They're bringing in reinforcements. From orbit, we've intercepted chatter. How long? Elias asked. A day, maybe less. He turned back to the gathered ghosts. Dozens now, more arriving by the hour. The resistance had grown beyond squads and survival. It was a movement, a myth-given shape. But myths didn't win wars. They ended them. Elias stepped forward, and the crowd fell silent. The mist clung to him like a second skin. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. This is where they end it, where they think they erase us for good. No one moved. They don't understand what we've become. They see our weapons, our traps, our patterns, but not our purpose. We are not hidden. We are rooted. Every glyph, every whisper, every step in the shadows is a declaration. Kenta raised his fist. We are the forest. The phrase rippled to the crowd like wind through tall grass. A dozen voices, then more. We are the forest. Marla smiled faintly. Then let's show them what the forest remembers. That night, they descended into the valley, not with guns drawn, but with silence. The ghosts moved like water, through cracks in the hills, beneath fallen logs, within the hollows of scorched trunks. The monolith loomed above them, its light scanning, but seeing nothing. Each time a pulse rippled outward, the ghosts halted. Each time it faded, they crept forward. Inside the structure, the aliens worked. Tall, silent figures glided across control platforms, their movements precise, ritualistic. At the heart of it all stood a being unlike the others. Taller, armored in layers of shifting metal and bone. Its head was crowned with a halo of sensors. Its voice echoed through the chamber, not in sound, but through psychic hums that bent the air itself. It was a commander, not just tactical, but strategic, perhaps even psychic. Marla mouthed a single word across the shadowed corridor. Alpha. They had reached the core. Elias knelt beside the glyph carrier, an elder ghost who'd walked from the tundra with nothing but her staff and a cloak of crow feathers. She placed a small wooden idol at the base of the monolith, a totem inscribed with stories older than any satellite. As she whispered in her native tongue, the totem shimmered. Not light, meaning. Kenna placed a pulse mirror, a handmade device that captured and reflected alien signals, scrambled through woven crystal dust. Marla attached explosive fungus spores along the coolant ducts, silent, reacted to pressure changes, designed to detonate with soundless force. The plan wasn't to destroy the monolith. It was to infect it. At the core, the Alpha turned its head slightly. It sensed something, a tremor in its order. It extended a limb toward the system's console, but its arm slowed, stuttering as it confused. One of the holographic interfaces flickered. Then another. The glyphs had begun to work. They weren't just symbols. They were disruptions. Stories incompatible with machine logic. Cultural chaos injected into perfect code. The ghosts had weaponized myth. As the Alpha recoiled, Elias stepped from the shadows. Not cloaked, not hidden, visible, mud-streaked and proud, his face marked with charcoal spirals. He didn't run. He walked. The alien screamed without sound, hurling a kinetic bolt that shattered the wall behind him. Elias dodged left, rolled, and signaled to strike. Ghosts poured from every crevice, emerging like the spirits they had become. There were no battle cries, only precision. Fire licked the air. Acid blades sliced through composite limbs. The monolith shook under the weight of collapse and resistance. Marla charged the Alpha, blade meeting blade, sparks dancing in the air like fireflies. It struck her hard, sent her sprawling, but she rose again, teeth bared, a growl in her throat. Kenta flanked from the rear, looping a snare cable around the commander's lower limbs. The final blow came not from a gun or a bomb, but from the totem, Its glow intensified until the chamber itself began to twist. The Alpha staggered, sensors scrambling to decipher the impossible. Around it, the glyphs unfolded into patterns it could not understand. Not language, not logic, emotion. It screamed again, but this time in fear. The explosion was quiet. The monolith folded inward, its systems imploding into a single, brilliant burst of white. The Alpha vanished in a cloud of ash and disrupted data. The valley trembled. The pulse died. The silence that followed was not absence. It was peace. Elias crawled from the rubble, his arm bleeding, his vision blurred. Marla limped beside him, smoke curling from her armor. Kenton knelt at the shattered edge of the control platform, cradling a broken relay in one hand. Around them, the forest breathed again. Not a sound, not a drone, not a single trace of alien presence. The totem still glowed faintly, its edges charred but intact. Elias picked it up, holding it in both hands. "They'll send more," Kenneth said. Elias nodded. "Let them. This time, they'll find a story waiting for them." Marla touched the totem. "And a forest that doesn't forget." Above them, the mist cleared. The stars came out, sharp and unblinking, watching the earth with ancient patience. The resistance didn't cheer. They didn't dance. They remembered. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, the invaders began to understand. The war had never been about land. It had been about belonging. And the ghosts belonged more than they ever could.